So intro to this is basically the history on this one is there is a JavaScript workshop Thursday nights at 9 in collab with Career Karma that is decently attended, but because it has a transient audience, the topics that are discussed usually don't get beyond what is a function and what is a variable and how do you add two numbers together. So I wanted to provide an opportunity, and folks voted on it, so among many other options, to take a deeper look at JavaScript and how the language actually works and all the other nuances that you can come across. And yeah, do all the things that is beyond just like writing functions. So yeah, the goal is deeper appreciation for the language and then the ability to describe the event loop. So that's something that I don't know. It would be impressive if I asked somebody that was new to the language and they actually could describe it. So my goal is it's not very difficult conceptually, but it's fundamental to how JavaScript as a language works. And I think it's important for anybody to understand how it works because it'll simplify, like anytime you're like, why is that happening? Or why am I getting a different answer back than what I expected it to be? Or why am I not getting back anything at all? It's usually because of the event loop. If you understand that, then that's a huge part of JavaScript. And then prototype. So if you haven't heard of the prototype or prototypal chain or prototypal inheritance, JavaScript doesn't work like a traditional object-oriented language. There is no concept of a class, even though ES6 gives you classes. There's no idea of a class or like that encapsulation in JavaScript. You don't inherit from like one class to another like you would in an object-oriented language like Java or Python or any of those languages. You have a prototypal chain and you inherit the prototype or your clone from the prototype, and we'll get into that not this week but next week. And then promises and events, which also ties back to like the event loop, but are pretty fundamental in JavaScript. Is any of that already familiar? Because we can certainly skip ahead if you're like, I already did the event loop on my own, I can already explain it. But so is that?
This is going to be review, but it's going to be perfect review because it's been like 2 months. I've been doing Python for a while in the curriculum, so everything here looks amazing.
Okay. Cool. So yeah, these are things. So we'll kick off with this, which again it's trivial, but it's important. And yeah, again, just yell at me. So Java, in programming languages, there's this idea of pass by reference and pass by value. So when you, let me see if I can split this. Just take this workshop's going to be happy because I actually have to program and not just talk, and it's going to be a little bit of juggling. But let's say I just define something and I pass it to some function here and I give it some number. Actually, I'm not even going to assign this a type. It's just something. In some in programming languages, like your early C, C++, you could there's an idea of reference pointers, which are just basically where that memory is or where that variable is stored in memory. And so instead of passing the actual value of the variable, which is what we refer to when we say pass by value, it's the actual value stored at the variable. You could pass the reference location, so the memory address, to where that variable was in memory. So this function didn't get the value, it could go to that memory address and read the value if it needed the value, or it could completely change what was at that memory address, effectively updating the value of this variable. And so that would be like passed by reference. It's referring to like a reference to the memory address to where that value is located. So in programming languages, you have different, the common ones now, most of them do something like they will pass like integer strings, what's the word for them? Integer strings, I'm trying to think of the name of them, but like the non-object and non-array types of data structures. There's a word for those types of variables, and I can't remember it. But they're all passed by value, whereas objects, arrays are passed by reference. So what's passed into the function is actually that memory address. In JavaScript, though, everything is passed by value, but and again, these are like similar, but there's a hairline difference in that in JavaScript, it's still passing the value, but the value it's passing is the reference location. And I know that sounds like I almost just said the same thing like twice, but there's a slight difference, and that's typically how programming languages operate these days. So what that means is my demo here, maybe this would like make it a little bit more clear, is let's just build this out. So I've got a bunch of functions here, and all they do is modify something. So this one modifies a number, you give it a number, or it's not returning anything, it's just saying like number is equal to 1. Modify an array, give it an array, and it just adds something to the array. Modify an object, give it an object, and it just adds a color property to the object. And then we set up some variables, and then we call the functions with those variables. And then I have my utility console log thing that can just be ignored. And pull this back out, rerun this so we can see it outputs. Let's trim this down a little bit. So let's say we just want the number. So numbers passed by value. We start with some number, it's equal to 3. We try and modify it. We set it to 1. It doesn't change the value because this is passed by value. Num becomes something different. We set that to 1 and don't do anything with it, so it disappears into the abyss. And that kind of is expected. Like we can kind of make that assumption. That operates kind of how you would expect it to. If we go and then say some array, so there's a couple things going on with this one. One, this is defined as a constant. We have a constant array that has 2 values in it, 2 numbers. We're going to call modify array on it, and let's see, modify array, and we're going to push something to, so the array comes in, we push to it, we mutate it, doesn't return anything. This isn't even being stored in a variable. We're just going to then log that value. And what we see here is now some array actually has 3 values in it. That 1 gets pushed and mutates the original array that we passed into it, even though we defined it as a constant. And that's what trips some people up, and that's why I always, when people say like define it as a constant means it can't be changed, that's not true, because it means that we couldn't assign some array to a different array because that would change the memory location. So in that aspect, that's true. Like we could come and change some number. We could come here and say like, no, now some number is equal to 4, and that'll be legal because we're basically allocating a new memory location, saving it off this variable, and we can do that with let. But const, if we were to try and say like some array is now equal to something else, this is going to error because it's going to tell you like, hey, no, this was defined as a constant, assignment to constant variable. You can't change it. But it doesn't mean that the value at that memory location can't be mutated.
So its value is mutable, but its reference is not because JavaScript is a reference language.
So yes,
Yeah.
kind of. JavaScript is passed by value everywhere, but what that value is what's different with JavaScript. The value of arrays and objects is the memory location, and so that value, because that's the value, that's what can't be changed when you assign a const. And so that's why we can actually change the object. We can change the array, like mutate it, but we can't reassign a new array or something else to that memory location. That's hopefully now seeing some examples. What I was saying before makes a little bit more sense. We'll do plenty more examples, but yeah, so that's the thing here. And I guess to finish out the examples, some objects. So I've got an object that has a name, an age, some pets. Pets is an array. And now we want to modify the object and add a new property to it called color. So if I just put some object down here, we're going to see now that it actually outputs the object with color on it. So we mutated, even though, again, this was defined as a constant, we were able to mutate that and change it. Why? Where does this cause grief for people? This causes grief because we're doing something here that you shouldn't do. And it's kind of evident because we only have one operation in here. But let's say, again, trying to think of things on the fly, you had a function and it took an array and we were doing other things to this array. And then maybe we were filtering it or adding things to it or whatever, and then doing some computation and returning the value. Like maybe we needed to, then array sorted it, and then we returned, like, I don't know, the array, the first index of it or something. This sort is a mutation to the array. So we're going to, at least I'm pretty sure it is. So we can test this. So it is 321 is the array. If I run this, do we go? Oh, I have to change this. Yeah. So now we get 1, 2, 3. And let's like throw some other like random. Let's say this is like 33 in here. So that should be at the end. It is. So that's being sorted, and we're returning. But like, say this was like, find max or something, or find min is what this would be. But our array was used like maybe down here we're like, freaking, give me the first one down here of some array. Let's see, it would have to be after I modify it. So let's say down here, I want to log some array of 0, and I expect this to be 3 because my array is defined, like, or maybe in my program I like assigned it and I'm like, I know that I want the first value of it, but then something else in my program between the time when I assign it here and I log it here, does it, what did I typo? My modifier array is not defined. Where's that? This is the problem with live coding. 29. Oh, because I changed it to find min. Change this back. So yeah, I'm getting 1 out of this array now, even though I would have expected it, like I expect this to be 3. And now I've got a bug in my program that is hard to find because maybe, like, potentially I didn't even write this code. Like, this somebody else wrote it. It's happening somewhere else in my program, and I have this expectation. And so that's the problem when you start dealing with. So one, this is bad practice. Let's start there. Like one, I want to say, like, this can happen because it's a reference type. It can be modified out from under you, but this can be avoided by not doing what we're doing here. This is bad practice. um, you should always like this. You might have heard of pure functions. I didn't even throw this on the syllabus thing, but pure functions are defined as a function that has no side effects. Um, so this, because at what we're doing in here by sorting it, mutates state somewhere else in our application because it's modifying the array. It has a side effect. The other things that could be considered side effects is if I was to make an HTTP request or a call to a database or something in this thing, as well as doing something else, that's a side effect. Pure functions state that a function should do one thing and one thing only with those side effects. So if you adhere to that, then what we should be doing is actually, let's see, we can take in this array and like we would, so this is like our modify array, and we say, hey, I want you to do something to this array. We can do is say, I think, let's see, we would have to, well, let's do this. Let's say new array. Let's see, new array. Basically like this. Oh, so if I do that, and I guess I wanted to keep. I need to, so this is another thing to call out with JavaScript. What is it? I think I can do, I'm forgetting does that work on arrays? Yeah, so, all right. That illustrated two things. Let me go back to this. So this is what was before. I don't know if anybody caught that, how we were paying attention, but doing that, just assigning it, because again, this assignment is pretty much the same thing as what's happening when it's passed into this function, is under the covers, JavaScript isn't actually giving you a new array. It's allocating basically some memory and pointing that to the old one. We can look at this in, well, maybe down the line I can show you the trick in objects, but it's why if you have a bunch of things in JavaScript that are the same data, but you're doing different things with that data, instead of like JavaScript's not going to copy and store multiple copies of that data. It's going to basically give a pointer to that data multiple times. So it's only ever storing this idea of a pointer. So even though I modified and then only acted on this new array and added an element, blah, 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 it's still like mutating if I was to log both of these arrays, just the arrays. They're going to be exactly the same. The other thing is they're coming back as true because they're pointing to the same memory location. They're also like going to be the same array like in details, but JavaScript's not going to necessarily like go through and say, are all the values the same? I know they're the same because they point to the same place in memory. To avoid that, you basically have to copy the array. And that's what this array.from does. This would be the other way to do this, which I think is what it would be equal to. You can use the spread operator on array. And so this is assigning, at least I'm 98% sure that'll work. Let's do, oh, we should get false now. Yeah, and if we do log these two, yeah, so we've got 3, 33, 2, 1 because we didn't, let's see. Yeah, so our original array doesn't have 1. We mutated it and sorted it, and now we've got a sorted list with the added 1. So this array.from was the original, like, old JavaScript. You can still do it. That was still working. The spread operator basically like says, give me an array, but takes that array and expands it so that it passes in each of the individual values, which if you like explode an array and then put it into an array, you now have an array that has all those values on it. Another trick here, like instead of calling the push that you can do is you can splat it like that, and then I can say and 1. So like spread out the array and then add 1 to it, and I'll get the same thing here. And this is how you would have to get a new array, because as we saw before, any attempt to just assign a new variable or mutate it without even doing the assignment is going to change the underlying array. This now is a pure function that all it does is it takes an array and gives you a new one back without any side effects. So now I can go and know that like I'm safe to use my new variable because it points to a new array. The old array is untouched, and whoever was doing whatever they were doing with it can continue to do whatever they want to do with it. All of that goes for objects as well, in object properties. So you can, you'd have to copy over or duplicate or clone an object to get a new one. Yeah, so question, how clear was that explanation? Questions from the audience?
That seemed pretty clear to me, like, but I'm also used to having to use new array all the time, but seeing the ES7 version was cool. I like that spread operator and just adding the 1 to the end.
Cool. Yeah, what else do I want to say about this? I think the only thing I really wanted to drive home is that, yeah, you can mutate stuff on accident. Don't do it. Try and make pure functions because it's a way to like not shoot yourself in the foot. The other thing, I guess, with pure functions, while I mentioned that, is that this is, we get rid of all the comments and clean it up. This is way easier to test than like a function that is pure that doesn't have any side effects is a lot easier to unit test than functions that have side effects, because I know that, you know, whatever array I give to it, it's going to add 1 and sort it. So I know exactly what the output's going to be. I never have to worry about it doing anything else. Pure functions, like the cool thing about them is that, and how you know you have a pure function is that anytime you use the function, you could like rip the function out and just replace it with the value, and your program's not going to know the difference. Again, because there's no side effects, it's not doing anything else than that one thing. And it's going to, if I give it the same array every single time, I'm going to get the same result every single time. And so that's easy to test against. And then you end up with like good tests, and not like any tests that potentially if this happens first, I'm going to get a different result, or if this changes first, I'm going to get a different result, blah, 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 blah. So cool. Let's see. Next up was objects and object literals and all this good stuff in ES6 classes. And I just open up another one in case I have to refer back to. So let's take this in chunks. Get rid of away. All right. So this, as we've probably all seen, it's how you write like objects in JavaScript. Just like, hey, I need an object and we give it some properties. Technically, these would be referred to like object literals, or at least that's what I've heard them referred to as, what I call them. And so they're just plain old JavaScript objects that are, well, I guess like the technical is they're flattened. They don't have a constructor. That's the biggest thing. They don't have any concept of private state because they don't have a constructor. So those two go hand in hand. Every property on an object literal can be modified at any point in time. Again, because you don't have that private state. These are what we're used to. You can add straight up properties that have values. You can add methods to an object. So this is a function on the object called speak, which is we give it a greeting and it's going to say something. The other way that you used to define objects, so functions in JavaScript are actually objects. Like pretty much everything in JavaScript is an object. And so you define objects like this, like as a function, and you give them something this. So an object that is, or class or whatever, I guess, I don't want to use class. An object that is defined this way does have this idea of privacy or private properties. And in this case, it's the greeting property. So it's defined as part of the function. This is almost like, kind of like the function, the constructor, when you start dealing with ES6 stuff, not quite, but kind of. And we can still define a method on it, in a function, and it's going to use that greeting that we set. So the example of, and also like this object, like you can't call new on it because it doesn't have the constructor or whatever. This person, you can call new on it and give it a value and blah, 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 blah. So we'll have John. John's a new person. His greeting is going to be hello. We'll call speak on him. We've got object that we have this speak method. And this is, we'll see this in a second, the next example, but there's a greeting defined on the object. This also allows us to redefine the greeting. And depending on if the greeting that we pass in exists or the greeting on the new one we create, or the one we override, it's going to use that. So if I just run this, we get good day from the object. So here it's using this greeting because nothing was supplied. And John says hello. So hopefully that's straightforward, or at least the old way. This isn't used too often anymore. But we can go and we can create like other objects. So this is, another person, and we're going to let him speak. So he says, hey, y'all. Again, just overrode the greeting and the constructor, call the same method. With these objects, the way that you can basically copy them or like get a constructor is this object.create. So object.create takes an object and basically gives you back an object with basically cloned of the object that you supplied. So Billy here becomes essentially equivalent to what we have here. And we can call Billy speak. And Billy speak's going to say good day as well, because it's no different really than calling this object, other than those are two separate objects. So they're not referring to the same like memory location of the same object underneath the two completely separate objects. And because of that, we can tell greeting or tell Billy, no, your greeting is now help. And then if we let Billy speak again, what we'll see is Billy's now saying help. He was saying good day, now he says help. And of course, it doesn't modify the original one that's still saying good day because those are two separate objects. So this was the gist of how you define objects in JavaScript pre-ES6. ES6 comes along and says, well, this is fine and all, and under the covers, we're still going to be doing something similar to this, but we want to have this sugar bits on top that makes it feel more OOP, more familiar to people coming from other languages. So they came up with, this new syntax for classes, even though they did not introduce an actual like class type in JavaScript. These are still objects. They work pretty much identical to how these are under the covers. But they allow you to have a constructor and all your private, so just like this, and I guess to demo that, so we've got John here, and let's say John dot greeting is equal to, I don't know, a bunch of gibberish. Try and run that. His greeting's not updating. That doesn't mean anything. Because this is private, if we wanted to like swap that around, you could do something like this dot greeting and call this dot greeting here. And now when I run this, it allows John to override that. But that defeats the purpose. We could have just at that point it'd be cleaner to just pass the greeting in here and use the greeting in this function. So this guarantees that like private state that we can't override the greeting of that object no matter what we do. Similar thing here is we can define this in the constructor, properties in the constructor, not with this, but you can define things in the constructor that gives you local like state. Define functions. So we've got a car can honk, and it's just gonna use whatever color we pass into the constructor. So we undo that, we run again. We've got check out my yellow car. And that's pretty much exactly to what's going on here. If we were to say like car, what's a new function color, and then this dot honk is equal to a function, and then we just logged the color or logged the string and passed the color in. That's what this is doing. What else do I want to say about that? Questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, so you say functions are objects, and I've definitely heard that before, but I have no idea how like all functions in JavaScript are objects. Could you say more about that?
Yeah, so we'll probably dive more into this in the upcoming like prototype stuff. But I can cover it a little bit here. So that in JavaScript, the base prototype, the thing that everything inherits from here. And inherit probably isn't the right term because I can get confused with like classical object-oriented inheritance, but everything comes from there. And the object has what's called a prototype. So it'd be like object.prototype. And when you extend something off of the prototype or extend something off of object, it gets this, like it inherits from the prototype. And so let's see, where am I going with this? When you define a function, its methods, it's like if I was to do object.prototype dot, what do we have here? Let's use the car. Let's say honk. That, make sure I'm making this clear and actually answer your question. That's going to be a function. So, and now I recognize I'm using like the word in the definition. But maybe this will make sense. And then we're gonna like do something. And now this is like, well, it's not right. It's so car inherits from like this. So under the covers, and that prototype is basically an empty object. Like that's just another object. And so when we create this like new car, or we define a car as a function, we're getting this base thing, which is an object. We're adding a method onto that, that prototype, or onto that object. This object is called car. I feel like I'm not explaining this. I know I'm not explaining this well.
Methods aren't objects, right?
What was that?
Methods aren't objects.
No, so like there's not, it's, a function is a function. Like a function is not an object per se, but when you define like this person as a function, like this is actually an object. And I'm trying to thread the needle on this, like, because what this is actually doing is going to the object prototype and basically putting all these properties on there and returning that object with methods. So it's like oh God. Because I kind of see where the confusion is, because I'm even getting tripped up in my words. Like this isn't going to be an object per se, like, because you're going to call it and it's going to run the function. But in JavaScript, I might have to dig a little bit further into like being able to explain this.
Like with methods on it, like an object has methods on it, so it's an object.
Yeah, I guess the direction I was taking my answer to that question is that everything, it's like a tree. Everything comes back to this base object as its like parent. Even like every time you're creating like cars equal to some function, it's all like creating this chain and this tree that comes back to this. And I guess that's where I'm like losing my explanation. Um, because when it does that, you can basically extend, and this is getting into like how JavaScript does its prototypal inheritance, is that you can assign this function. So if I was to assign this function to the object prototype, then everything that I created from the object prototype, so every function I declared there forward would have have a honk function on it. And I think, again, live coding is dangerous, but yeah, so like, I mean, this is from the object prototype. Just make sure I'm logging a bunch of stuff. Yeah, so I don't, it's a little bit trippy, and that's why I'm like trying to, and I haven't thought through, you're catching me a little bit off guard because I haven't prepped on how to actually explain this too well, which is partly why I do these, because it helps me get better at explaining this stuff. But that's what I was trying to explain is I'm creating a new function off of the prototype. So this is a function, and it's going to go and log some stuff, but it's on the object. Now I'm creating car from object, and I can call some method that is not, that I didn't do anything on car. I just said, give me a new object. And I can call honk on it, and it does this. You can also, like, I could go and say car.honk is equal to a function that's overridden. And now we're getting overridden because this is being triggered, because what JavaScript does is it looks on the object itself, which in this case would be the car. It says like, do I have a honk method? Because that's what they're trying to call here. And if it does, it says, cool, I'm just going to call that. But if I don't, it says, does my prototype, it starts walking the prototype chain. And it's going to walk its way all the way back up to object, which means this could, like right now we're creating a new object, but this could be like, we could have vehicle, we could have like something that, then there's a vehicle from that, and then a car from that. And if none of them implement honk, and then we get all the way back up to object, like this would still run. Like it's going to walk and go through all those ones that we inherit from on the prototype chain, and until it finds a honk method. And if it gets all the way to object and doesn't find it, then it goes, hey, that's undefined. But we can see this like in JavaScript, arrays are objects. I guess the better way to put it is the array types inherit from the object prototype as well, which means all the methods, so like isArray and .from and all those like random things are all actually stored on the object prototype itself.
That makes more sense to me.
I'm happy you're able to get something out of that explanation, because it was a little rough. It was quite rough. Yeah. I wish I had a better example on this. I don't have one together, but I will. That'll be, what's the schedule? Yeah, that's next week. So I'll have that next week. A much better example that demos that walks through like walking the chain and how to override that stuff. But when people say, or when I say that everything's an object, I guess the better way, the more correct phrasing is that everything inherits from the object prototype. There. I think that's a more succinct way to put it. Cool. So who's got other questions I can stumble over with my explanation? Patrick, what are you doing?
Playing with SQLize and it's kicking my butt.
Cool story, bro.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this, I guess, when did I, I don't know. You're the only one here, so the bonus is on you with questions. So I don't know, otherwise you can just say, nope, I already know, I know it all. Feel free to like, I don't know what you're working on or what project you got or what you're talking about. But feel free to ask anything that isn't even related to what I've been talking about.
Yeah, I feel good about the objects as you've reviewed them.
Okay. Well, that's all I got.
Sweet, thank you, Paul. I appreciate this. This has given me like, I was going through JavaScript for like the first time, and I made it up through like being able to implement jQuery, and now I'm supposed to use it on an API project. And it's been good to like kind of go back over it again, like with some fresh eyes, because when you're in the weeds, it's hard to understand the conceptual stuff. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, you can just throw jQuery in the trash.
That's what I've heard. I'm supposed to use it on this project for, taking off my boot camp checkboxes, but I actually prefer vanilla JavaScript and like easy to understand what's happening.
Yeah. The real issue with jQuery was, well, man, it was super popular back in the day because its tagline was "Write less, do more," and it held true to that. It allowed you to, write it, the selector object, the $sign or the jQuery selector object was innovative, or whatever you want to call it, to just be able to use CSS selectors to target elements and do event bindings and stuff like that. The biggest issue with it, I don't know if it's why people harp on it, but technically why people harp on it is it's very inefficient. So it has the modern libraries all have diffing algorithms that, and how they update the DOM, they do it efficiently. jQuery has to go through and touch every element in the DOM when it performs an update, which makes it ridiculously slow. And again, these are, slow by what standards? It's like, I don't know. I just click the button and it adds a thing to my list. Like, that didn't look slow to me. I blinked and it was there. It really isn't a problem for a site that has a moderate amount of JavaScript, a moderate amount of utility. My buddy calls it JavaScript sprinkles. It's like, these libraries existed back in the day because you weren't writing SPAs, single page applications, that were fully JavaScript driven. You'd write most of it on the server. It would render, in PHP or Ruby, Python, whatever. It would send it to the front, and then you wrote some JavaScript to set up your form, do some events, some clicks, maybe some animations, something like that, and that was it. And you can still like, there's no reason to go a full React app if you're just like having a form and want like some click event. Like that's dumb. And so bringing in a jQuery or one of the other, like, I mean, you can bring React in and just put it in this little square of your app, but there's other little libraries you can include that, give you that functionality in a nice, concise package. jQuery is one of them, although I think there's better ones these days. But the point is, in moderation, it's fine. The issue becomes when you start to do things like what React in single-page applications and larger JavaScript wholly driven, and when you're making all those calls to monitor state and update and trigger state and all this stuff, that's when jQuery starts to bog down and become slow, and it's just impossible to. You wouldn't be able to write a single-page application and have it like be snappy with what you'd expect today if you did that. So that's actually the real reason why people harp on jQuery. And now we have things like document.getElement by query selector, which didn't exist back in the day, and
really?
allows, yeah. You used to have to. The only things that existed when jQuery, before jQuery, and then even when jQuery was in its prime, was document.getElement by ID, which everybody's familiar with, and then document.getElements by class name. So you could get things by the class name, but that returns a node list. And the other thing, like the thing with DOM, like document dot whatever query selectors, is you don't get an array back, you get a node list, and like, which is a special type, which is a list of like DOM elements that behave kind of like arrays, but not exactly, or kind of, yeah. But yeah, so you could get an array of every element that had that class, but doing complex things like you could like true CSS selectors, like using whatever because with the jQuery or with document.getElement by query selector, you can pass in any CSS selector string. You can say, give me the first element that's under a div with this class that that isn't the last one or something like that. You can make any convoluted query selector now. That didn't exist back in the day. I'd say the other big one that people use jQuery for was $.post and $.get, the AJAX request. So I don't know if you've seen the old school XHTM or XML HTTP request.
No, I've just been using Axios.
Yeah. So this Axios, this is before that. This is what it's doing under the covers, because this is the actual like API. So all of these libraries abstract this, but what you had to do is basically like create that object and then set up all these listeners like ready state and like response and all this stuff that you would listen for like ready state equal to 4, because that meant that like everything had loaded and you'd get a response, but that's an array buffer, so that's just a bunch of bytes. And then you'd have to listen to when that response was finished, and then you'd have to convert that to a string and yada, yada, yada. I don't know if there's an example of like how the actual implementation was. No, but needless to say, if you ever look it up, look for like an actual implementation of it. It's like a bunch of boilerplate code just to make a GET request. And you had to do that every single time, and it was annoying. And people preferred to go, oh, $.get, and then I just give it the URL, and then I go, what is it? Like, I don't remember what it is in jQuery, but you just give the callback and you say, do this when you get the data back, and that made life so much easier. So I'd say between document selectors and like the HTTP requests being simplified is what hugely popular. It also had the animate library, but don't ever animate anything with jQuery. Then you really want to see it bog down. Do that. But
I didn't even know I could do that.
yeah, jQuery has an animation library built into it. You can do like any element. So this is your like, I don't know, some selector. You can call animate on it and then pass it animate and then pass it keyframe animations. And I don't know exactly how it is, but something like that. And you can move things around on the page and animate them. And I don't recommend doing it. Like, it's how people are doing animations nowadays. You can do it all on CSS. CSS has keyframe animation.
CSS has gotten legit.
Yeah. Yeah, that's basically taken over doing, and it's so performant. Like you can do, like if you're doing animations, you should be doing them CSS. Like I wouldn't even say, I'd say limited JavaScript is really even needed these days with it. Yeah, so, but I don't know.
Thank you so much for sharing your JavaScript wisdom today.
No problem. Look forward to seeing y'all back next week. Also, if you're interested at 9 o'clock, the Zoom link's in the thing. There's the other JavaScript one that, again, I don't know how valuable you'd find it. I'm not gonna like say don't go, judge for yourself, but that's why I'm doing this one, is because it's very, very limited in what they get into, but you're happy to check it out, or you're welcome to check it out.
My brain is pudding in the evenings, so I'm actually shut up for the day. So
All right. Well, cool. Thanks for attending. I'll talk with you later.
all right, bye.
All right.